is Christmas, and we're starting a series today. We're going to be looking at the gifts that were given to Jesus the night that he was born. And so today, this morning, we're going to be looking at the first gift that was given, and that's gold. So I brought several $100,000 worth of gold to put on the table for us to visualize. Gold is being traded somewhere over $4,000 per ounce right now. So I would have about $700,000 worth of gold by weight up here if this weren't painted by my kids last night, rocks. But imagine just for a moment if this was actually gold and this was actually $750,000 sitting up here on this table. Some of you would probably be charging the stage to get you a little piece, you know, but all of you would be saying, Jared, what are you doing? Put it in a lockbox somewhere. Put it somewhere safe, which is natural, right? That's logical. I think just from the top, I want to present this idea that we might be a little more naturally gifted to keep than we are to give. It's a little more natural for us in our minds and in our desires to keep things of value than it is for us to give things of value. So when we come to a story like the three wise men, right, that come to Jesus the night he was born and they give him gifts. And today we're going to talk about gold. Next week we're going to talk about frankincense. And the week after we're going to talk about myrrh. They gave these three gifts all of great value. We think about how unnatural it is. And here's the other thing I want to say before we jump in. The danger today is that you've heard this 100 times. The danger today is that it could go right through your ear and out the other because it's familiar. It's the danger of familiarity that we're wrestling with today. And my prayer has been all morning and even all week, it's, God, would you give us eyes to see this morning? Would you give us ears to hear? Would you help us to see what we've seen before, what we know before? But could you take it past our head and help it touch our heart? Help us to be reminded of just how valuable you are. As we look at a picture of three men that came to Jesus the night that he was born and gave him something of great value. There was a man who was about to die, and the family knew it, and his life was coming to an end. And one of his final wishes to his wife was, hey, I've made a lot of money. I've worked very hard to make all this money. And my only request is that you put all of it in the casket with me when you bury me. And there were a couple friends and family kind of listening on, and they're like, what? What is she going to do, you know? And she quickly said, sure, yes, sir. And the people around are freaking out because what are you going to do? There's quite a lot of money in the bank account. So the weeks go by and there's murmuring amongst the family, and they finally come to the funeral and everybody's saying, walking by the casket, giving condolences. And the wife comes up and she puts a white envelope in the casket right on top of his chest. And some of the friends and family and cousins are back there and they're just like, I can't believe she did that. I can't believe she did that. I didn't think there was any way she was going to do that. And one of the bravest cousins, maybe you've got one of those brave cousins, goes up to her in this moment. They're closing the casket door and the brave cousin comes up to her and says, you know, it's not too late. He'll never know. We can take it back. He'll never know. And she said, but here's the thing. I have to keep my word. I made a promise and I'm going to keep my word. So I wrote him a check. Wrote him a check. This whole side of the room don't write checks. They don't know what I'm talking about. They were like, wait, what are you doing, dude? But we're more natural at keeping than we are giving. Matthew chapter 2 is where we're going to be today. And we're going to look at this amazing scene with these three wise men that come to see Jesus. And as they give him the first gift of gold, that's really what we're going to be focusing on today. As you're turning there to Matthew chapter 2, we're going to have it on the screen as well. But this word, wise men, is actually the word for magi, and magi means astrologers or astronomers. These were people who studied the skies, who studied the stars, and were able to interpret them, or they thought they were able to interpret them, and they were able to interpret dreams as well. These are some of the descendants that Daniel, back in the Babylonian times, was able to help and lead and pour into. Pretty interesting connection there that we may not have time for today. But these astrologers are coming to Jesus. They're coming to see him born. They had heard about this King of the Jews, this King of Kings, and they're now coming to see him and give him gifts and worship him. Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. And then when they got to Jerusalem, so that's not all the way to Bethlehem yet, they stopped in Jerusalem because they needed to ask, look right here in verse 2, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. We saw his star and we've come to worship him. I love this because these pagan practices, learning how to read the stars, looking to the skies for wisdom and direction, these pagan practices that they had learned are now being used by God for good. These outsiders who did not have, they knew about God. They knew about these prophecies of Jesus. Absolutely. But they had not been studying the scriptures the way that the Jewish people had been. The Jewish people, the insiders that they're coming to speak to right now in this text, they knew this by heart. They knew everything about what was going to happen, about everything that had been foretold. But these three wise men come up, and God used the very thing that they had been practicing, that they had been learning, that really was a ritual of the world, to speak their language and get them to move and go wake up the rest. And before we go much deeper, I just want to stop right here, because there's some people in the room today that need to wake up to the reality that you know all the facts in your head, but it hasn't gotten to your heart yet. And no matter how much I yell and kick and scream or tell jokes or put rocks on the stage, there's no amount of anything that I can bring that can get that from your head to your heart. That's the Holy Spirit's work. But we need to wake up to this reality of the truth that's been up here but hasn't gone to here. And then the other group of people that I want to talk to right here just for a moment is the fact that you may think you're an outsider. You may think you're on the outskirts and you can't be used. You can. God can use you. God will speak to you in your language, through his word, lining up with his scripture, maybe through people in your life. It's going to be in your language because he's that good. And I love this picture of three wise men who heard and believed and obeyed. So they come in, they say, hey, where's the King of the Jews? We saw the star. Now we've come to worship this king. And Herod is there, King Herod in Jerusalem, and he's a little bit offended because he's the king. And so he gathers all the people together, all the smart people, the scribes, the Pharisees, the ruler, everybody's in this assembly. And he's like, okay, let's talk about what's going on here. And so I've got this picture of all of the smartest and most powerful people in this assembly. And then these three outsiders from the far east that have come a very, very long way who have called this assembly to talk about the very thing that every smart person in this room knows is going to happen. But the only three that are actually acting on it in this moment are the three outsiders. And they call everybody to the room, and Herod brings them all in, and Herod says, okay, what are we talking about here? And they go back to the prophet Micah, and they pull back the Old Testament, and they start quoting what the prophet Micah said hundreds of years before. And absolutely, it is exactly what's happening right here. And in this scene, you have probably a jealous Herod You have a grumbling bunch of smart people, and then you have 3 Magi in the middle with gifts prepared to go worship the King of Kings. The only ones who follow through were the star worshipers. And God's people who have studied it their whole life are sitting around in a circle arguing about who's right and who's wrong, arguing about the interpretation. Brian talked about praying earlier. Did you talk about praying for things earlier, or was that in the 9 o'clock? Am I about to give them something they don't know about? You don't remember. He talked about like praying for, no, he didn't talk about that earlier. Now I got to catch him up. He said there's some things you don't have to pray about. Was that in here or the 9 o'clock? You did say that. Okay. He's like, there's some things you don't have to pray about. The opportunity comes and we say yes because we don't have to pray about that. What does he mean? He means we already know that that's what God has called us to do. He doesn't mean don't pray about it. He means we've already been praying about it, and now the opportunity comes, act. And I've got this picture in this assembly, this holy assembly of all the smart people and all the biblical scholars, and they're trying to figure out what's the right way to go. And I don't want that to be us, spending all of our time in here trying to get all of to the nth degree of what we're supposed to do or what we're supposed to know before we actually act. I think a better picture is what the wise men did. God sent outsiders to wake up the insiders. Let's keep going in verse 8 of Matthew chapter 2. Herod sent them to Bethlehem, and he said, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, that I may too come and worship him." Yeah, right. Verse 9, after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them, and it went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. I love that. God is guiding it the whole way. And it came to rest over where the child was so that they would know where he was and where to go. But look at verse 10. Before they got there, they saw the star, and they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Even before they got to Jesus, they began rejoicing exceedingly with great joy. We'll come back to that verse here in just a moment. In verse 11, going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and they worshiped him. And then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. There's 2 points that I want to teach today from this text. They brought gold because 1, they saw Jesus rightly, and 2, they brought gold because they held gold lightly. Before we jump into those 2 points, I want to give you kind of our key guiding question for us to consider today, and that is this. What are you bringing to Jesus? Said another way, what is your gold that you're bringing to Jesus? The first gift they brought was gold. We aren't sure how much gold. Probably wasn't this much gold, but it might have been a lot of gold. Regardless of how much it is, we know that it was of great value. We also know that this was a gift or offering fit for a king. Because what do you give for people who already have so much? In those days, they would bring gold with its inherent value. It was reserved for the highest and most significant gifts, especially when you're giving it to a ruler or a king. That's how we know, number 1, that they saw Jesus rightly. Bringing gold was not random. It was a clear declaration that you, Jesus, are the King of Kings. And even further, it was a clear declaration that they were saying, you are my king. And so I'm bringing you this gift. They didn't wait for Jesus to prove himself. He was a baby. I love this picture because so often we need proof before we act. We need proof before we give. We need proof before we do, before we obey. They didn't wait for that. They got the revelation and they obeyed. They acted, they went, and they were open-handed with what they were bringing. And so this newborn baby, who can do absolutely nothing with this, by the way, is receiving an incredibly valuable, precious medal. Why? Because revelation precedes worship. Say it another way. You will give to Jesus extravagantly when you see Jesus accurately. When they came to Jesus, they knew that they were visiting the King of Kings. Notice their posture. They didn't just kneel down on one knee. The Bible says that they knelt down and they put their face to the ground. I wonder, the Bible doesn't say this, so I want to be clear, but I do kind of wonder, did they go into this moment prepared for what they were about to experience in their heart? Did they come into this moment ready to posture themselves like they would with a king, ready to get down on a knee and show honor to the king? Did they come with this posture? But then when they got there, they realized, like Isaiah in his prophecy, oh my goodness, I am a man of unclean lips. Woe is me. I don't belong. This is glory in front of me. And they couldn't help but get all the way down with their face to the ground. This is not a proud, there's no pride in this at all. And it's a baby. I don't want you to miss the fact that it's a baby. If you're a bystander looking on, you're bowing to a baby, people. They knew who Jesus was. They saw him rightly. I love that we started with John chapter 1 today. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. There was nothing that was made apart from him. He is the light of the world. All of these things are in the present perfect tense. In other words, all of these things were true of him in that very moment, even as a baby. And so something supernatural and spiritual was being communicated in that moment, in that house after Jesus was born. Yes, he's a baby, but no, he's not just a baby. And it was obvious to them. Even before he did a thing, it was obvious to them. They didn't need to see him preach a sermon. They didn't need to see him perform a miracle. They didn't need to see him multiply fish. They knew who he was, and they acted accordingly. There was faith in that moment. There was faith in the room. And they opened their treasure that they had carried the whole way, possibly 400 miles that they had traveled. And they brought it to present before this child, this king. They saw Jesus rightly, and they held their gold lightly, number 2. They held their gold lightly because money did not master them. They held their gold lightly because it wasn't about money for them. It wasn't about riches for them. It wasn't about having. It was about giving because it was really about lordship. When they saw him rightly, they then held gold lightly. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, a familiar verse for us. It says, keep your lives free from the love of money. And then it goes on to say, because God has said, never will I leave you nor forsake you. What I love most about this verse, we quote the first part, right? Keep your lives free of the love of money. It's not money that's the problem, it's the love of money that's the problem. I love that. I agree with that. But what I love even more is the context of the verse. He goes on to finish the verse, not by saying, keep your lives free of the love of money because God will always be here to give you more money. It's not what it said. Our security that we're rooted and established in is not that he's going to give us more material things. It's that he will be with us. God with us, Emmanuel. Do you see that? So keep your lives free of the love of money because you have a promise that he will be with you. Keep your lives free of the love of money because you have a promise that he will never forsake you. Keep your lives free of the love of money, not because you need to have more money and not because God wants you to have more money, but because God has a better plan. He always has the best plan, and he's going to be with you. These wise men were able to hold their gold lightly. Here's what I know. It will either control you or it will serve you. It will either possess you or you will possess it. And the interesting thing about holding things, money, possessions, relationships, career, things, is you think the tighter you hold, the more you are in control. But in reality, the tighter you hold, the more it controls you. The tighter you hold to it, the more it has possession over you. The opposite is true. The more you let go, the more you hold it lightly, the more you have an open hand with it, the more you are in control of it. The more you possess it in order to use it. I read the story of a man who was on vacation. He was taking a walk outside of his hotel, and he heard this lady on the sidewalk screaming for help. And he ran around and to see what was going on, and there was a kid down on the ground, and the kid was choking on something. He couldn't tell what, and the lady said, it's a coin. He swallowed a coin. He's got a coin in his throat. And so the man just grabs him by the ankles, picks him up by his ankles, and starts shaking him. I'm like, where'd you learn that trick? That's not, what about the Heimlich? Or, you've seen people literally reach in there and grab it out. No, he just grabbed him by the ankles and started shaking him. And sure enough, the coin just fell right out and he was able to breathe and everything was fine. And of course, the mom was so grateful and thankful and giving him a hug. And, hey, how did you know to do that? Are you a doctor? And he said, no, ma'am, I'm not a doctor. I'm a part of the Internal Revenue Service. I'm really good at getting money out of people. There's a section right in the middle right there that's worried about their tax returns, and they did not laugh a bit at that joke. That was not good. The IRS, okay, all right, yeah. Here's what I want you to see. The Magi, the wise men, they didn't have to be shaken. They didn't have to be held up by their heels and shaken to bring the gifts that they had and offer them at the feet of Jesus. They just gave it. And they gave it without any expectation of anything in return. Their worship was simply based on his worth. My youngest daughter, last night, we were painting, we were putting together the gold, and she said, okay, Dad, but what is this about? And so I was telling her a little bit and how the wise men brought gold to Jesus. And she said, but Dad, Jesus doesn't need gold because he already has everything that he needs. I said, babe, that'll preach right there. Absolutely. He already has everything he needs. But we don't give to him because he needs it. We give to him because he's worth it. And something happens in us when we release that is greater than anything we could keep. You see that? We don't give to him because he needs it. We give to him because he's worth it. We don't come in here and sing songs because he needs it. We don't come in here and sing about how holy he is because he needs it. We come because he's worth it, and we need it. We need it. Matthew chapter 2, verse 10 that we just read earlier. I'd love for you to underline this or highlight this or somehow remember this because I love this verse. It says, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. It happened, the rejoicing exceedingly with great joy happened even before they saw him, even before they came to him. This posture of readiness and expectation. They came into this scene rejoicing exceedingly with great joy before they even laid eyes on baby Jesus. They were excited to get to give. Their giving came from a grateful place. It sprung up from almost like a mountain spring. You know, there's such a big difference between a natural spring and like a retention pond. With a mountain spring that you find, you have to almost stop it. Like you have to like control it or redirect it, or it wants to just spring. It's naturally just springing up. With a retention pond that's catching it, and there's all that water in there that sometimes you've got to release or drain because it's not going anywhere if you don't. You have to try to get the water out of a retention pond, and there's such a big difference here, but there's really a fine line when it comes to how we come to church. We can either be a mountain spring or we can be a retention pond. And a lot of days, we feel like a retention pond. We can't get the water to flow. We can't feel what we're singing. We can't feel what we're hearing. We're having a hard time with the response part of this. And so we try to stir it up, or we try things on the surface to get it moving, when in reality, what we need to do is dig. What we need to do is go back to a place of remembrance. What we need to do is go back to the truth of the scripture of who God is and what he's done and what he's promised. And we need to soak in it until it's deep enough to start springing forth. You can't fake this on the surface. That only goes so far. You can only stir up the water that's been there for years, for so long. He's got more for you, and you've got to go deep for it. And the beautiful thing about fresh revelation is it doesn't have to be the first time. But you got to dig. You got to dig into that relationship. May we be a room full of mountain springs. These men couldn't contain their joy. That's what the Bible says. But another amazing thing about it that I noticed is none of these wise men are named. It would make sense from an earthly standpoint if they came and brought gifts and they came for this moment to gain notoriety or fame. In 2025, if this scene would have happened, they probably would have had a camera guy with them, ready to post this moment. Marketing plan of how they can get their brand out there, you know. The Bible doesn't even name them. They're not doing this for fame. They didn't come to get accolades. They didn't come to gain favor with God. This was a very natural response because they had seen Jesus rightly. They had received the revelation, and then they came to worship him, holding what they had lightly. And their faith was what was on display. They just gave it. They just gave it. And it was their joy to do so. The great missionary Jim Elliot, one of my favorite quotes of all time, this is what he said. He said, "He is no fool to give what he cannot keep, to gain what he cannot lose." You are no fool to give the things that you cannot keep. The guy in the story, in the casket that wanted his money with him when he went, he could not take it with him. You are no fool to give what you can't keep in order to gain what you cannot lose. And what you cannot lose is treasure in heaven. What you cannot lose is a free heart and a free soul. What you cannot lose is an opportunity to change somebody else's life because of the way you're living and what you're speaking and what you're sowing into them. What you cannot lose is the treasure that you have laid up in heaven, where moth and rust cannot destroy it, and the thief can no longer steal it. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. We have a picture of this here, a clear picture of what it looks like to give what you cannot keep in order to gain what you cannot lose. When we come to Jesus, we exchange the treasures of earth for the treasures of heaven. But as long as you're holding the treasures of earth in your hands, it will be difficult to hold the treasures of heaven in your heart. And so many of us are walking around and we're trying to do things like hold what we've got and study our Bible at the same time. It's really kind of difficult to do, get to the right page. Because when you're holding the things of this world in your hand and they become treasures for you in your hand, it's hard to have the treasures of heaven in your heart. These gold nuggets, if you will, represent value. They represent control. They represent maybe a career that you love, that you've worked for. They may represent for you a relationship that is holding you back. They may represent a habit that you can't shake, that you're trying to shake, but you still are holding on to it. You're not really ready to let it go yet. It may represent money for you. It may represent things and material goods. I want you to get in the mindset of, okay, what is it that I'm holding on to that's keeping me from holding on to the treasures of heaven? For me, it's my plans. It's my strategy for life. It's what my vision. How hysterical that I want to bring God in and say, can I show you my plan and my vision in 8 short slides with a lot of data to back it up and some illustrations and a lot of wise people in my life that I engaged and got some advice from. Lord, I don't know that you fully thought this through the way I have. I've been spending a lot of time on this, but this is a good plan, God. Maybe some of you have a similar story. You've got a dream. You're holding on to a dream that He didn't give you. You're holding on to a plan that you put together. And there may be shreds of goodness in that plan. Most likely there are. That's why it's subtly dangerous. But His plan is so much bigger. His plan is so much greater. His dream that He wants in your heart is so much bigger and so much greater. And when we come and we bring these things and we hold them lightly before Him and we're prepared to give them to Him, a lot of times He doesn't take them out of our hands and throw them away. Sometimes He takes them and He makes them even better and He makes them even broader and even more transformational than we could imagine because we held it open and we got out of the way for Him to move. What's your gold today? What's in your hand today? Because I think the point of this lesson is not that they brought gold. The point of this lesson is that they proved that Jesus was more important than the gold. And I think that's what He wants for us too. I think He wants us to press deeper into a surrendered posture. I think He wants us to sacrifice, not so that we can have nothing, but sacrifice so that He can be everything. Jesus was treasured more than their gold. They saw His worth and they were joyful in their worship before Him. I don't think Jesus is looking around today to see who's willing to give the most. I don't think He's weighing your gold. I think He's actually kind of weighing your heart and seeing how deep you're willing to go in obedience and surrender. It's not how well you are giving today. It's how well you are seeing today. Because if you see Him rightly, you will hold on to this world lightly and you will begin walking by faith. And when you're walking by faith with that perspective, the whole world can change through your influence. today can be a turning point in your story as we prepare to worship again. As Pastor Brian says, this altar is never closed. And I want to invite you to come open-handed today. There's some people in the room that need to come to this altar in just a moment and present what you're holding on to the King of Kings. And you need to be honest with him about what you have, what you desire. And you need to be willing to say, but Lord, let your will be done. If you need to take this from me, if you need to change this for me, if whatever you need to do with this, let your will be done. Your ways are higher. Your thoughts are higher. It's your will that I want. That's a lot of people in this room right now. There's also some people in this room right now that you're also holding on to things of this world, and it makes a lot of sense to you because you don't know Jesus. You don't have a relationship with Jesus. And we don't ever want to leave this place without giving you an opportunity to respond to him and come into a relationship with him by faith. He's made it possible for us because of his sacrifice on the cross and his fulfillment of the scriptures by raising from the dead on the third day. He's made it possible for us to have a relationship with him by faith.